Welcome to the Joy of Cruising podcast with your host, award-winning author Paul C. Thornton, a weekly conversation with the amazing cruisers featured in the Joy of Cruising books, comprised of The Joy of Cruising, Cruising Interrupted, new release, The Joy of Cruising Again, as well as other fun, informative global cruise personalities. It's the next best thing to cruising, hearing about cruising from the unique and diverse perspectives of Paul's amazing guests. If you hear about a cruise that interests you, book it at www.thejoyofvacation.com or enter to win a free cruise for two. Again, www.thejoyofvacation.com. We really appreciate your feedback, so leave us a text. Paul can't reply, but he may read your text on the air.
Hello, passionate cruisers. This is Paul. I am delighted to welcome this week on the Joy of Cruising podcast, Kim Anderson, global nomad, host, and creator of the Design Her Travel podcast. Design Her Travel inspires you to live the life of your dreams and incorporate more travel into your daily life. Each week, you'll discover travel tips and tales from individuals doing just that. Whether you're dreaming of taking your first trip or an experienced globetrotter, each week, through our guest interviews and solo episodes, you'll hear inspiring stories and discover proven travel methods that will motivate you to take the next step in designing your life. Kim is a global citizen who has lived, worked, and traveled to almost 40 countries. Many of her years were spent traveling the world by sea or exploring the world through solo adventures. Her purpose in life is to show people in the world and be a living inspiration for their dreams. As creator and host of the Design Her Travel podcast, Kim currently showcases stories of people living extraordinary lives with travel as the centerpiece. Kim and Design Her Travel has been featured in a Backpacker magazine in Asia and Dock Walker magazine and on several podcasts. I have to say, Design Her Travel and the Joy of Cruising podcast have some key characteristics in common. We are both about travel. We have a similar number of episodes and are both quite global with listeners in over 100 countries. There is one difference though. Design Her Travel is in the top 2.5% of podcasts in the world, making Kim my podcast role model. Welcome, Kim, to the Joy of Cruising podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and have this conversation today.
So how you doing?
I am well. It is, kind of early-ish morning on a Friday just before the holidays. And so kind of in the holiday spirit and wrapping up the week. So everything is beautiful.
Good. Well, first, before we discuss your stellar career in, on, and around the sea, and now behind the mic, tell our listeners about yourself in general, where you're from, where you live, your professional background, anything you would like to share.
Sure. So I am currently based in the Midwestern part of the U.S., which is where I was raised. I grew up on a tiny little farm in rural America with a very deep connection to the land and the food. And then I graduated university and never returned. I ended up falling in love with the ocean, traveling around the world, and became a global citizen. So as life does, it's kind of a funny journey. And I came back here to raise my son. And that's where I'm at currently.
On your top-rated podcasts, Design Her Travel, you identify 5 of what you refer to as signature topics. And all sound like compelling travel topics, and I'll urge the listeners to check Design Her Travel out. We'll discuss 2 of those signature topics, but for the listeners, the 5 are 1, global citizenship, the transformational power of travel, defining and designing your dream life, and the 2 that I would like to chat about today, Kim, traveling around the world by sea and private yacht travel and crew. All of those sound interesting to my listeners, but but those two in particular, as my listeners are mainly the global cruise community. Talk about traveling the world by sea. Give us an overview of all that entails for you, Kim.
Sure. Well, I guess I should start by saying I realized when I was with a friend in New Zealand that I always knew I would sail around the world. And coming from someone who didn't see the ocean until I was 12 or 13, as soon as I had that thought, I remembered that I knew it's something I would do. And so my mission, and when I started sailing the world, was I went from New Zealand to Australia when my New Zealand visa was running out, and my goal was to sail out of the country. And so I did that. I went all the way around Australia from Perth, and then I realized people don't sail from Perth, and so I went back to the East Coast and worked in Airlie Beach, and I worked on the Great Barrier Reef, and then I met a family who were cruising the world on their sailboat, and we sailed through from Australia throughout Southeast Asia, and so traveling the world by sea for me has looked a myriad of ways, everything from working as crew or living with a family that were cruisers to whale watching, snorkeling tours in Hawaii to working in the private yacht industry. So I have explored the world in all kinds of oceans and seas in a bunch of different vessels, a bunch of different ways, paid or unpaid, but it's really exploring the world in one way or another, and you get there by sea.
So working as crew, you mentioned. So that's working as crew on sailboats.
Yes, I started out on some of them are motor sailors, like in Airlie Beach, they were big, kind of like old-fashioned ketches, like these sort of old school vessels. And then the cruisers were sailboats, yes. And then most of the snorkeling and whale watching were ribs, so motor vessels, kind of like the Coast Guard uses.
So working as crew, was that a means to an end? I mean, was that just your way to finance your travels, or was that some aspiration that you developed early on that you wanted to do that?
Well, it started out as a means to an end. Like the first family I was with, I spent 6 or 7 months with them, and what I gave to them was a watch keeper. So there were four of us. We divided the shifts, and everybody had 2 3-hour shifts in the day. So my watches were 2 to 5 in the morning and 2 to 5 in the evening. And so they were a family of three, and they needed extra help when underway. So I got room and board in return for me being on watch. And then it kind of changed over the years. It was a way for me to explore the Great Barrier Reef and do all of these activities. I volunteered my time, but then eventually I learned that I could actually get paid, and get paid really well, to do this thing that I loved. But it took me quite a lot of years of working on the sea in a bunch of different vessels to learn that there was the private yacht industry. And then that's when I stepped into being like a professional mariner. And that was my pay, my career, and I explored it in that way.
So let's move to private yacht travel and crew. That sounds fun and intriguing. Talk about that aspect of your career.
Yeah, the private yacht industry is phenomenal. It is extremely challenging. It's extremely high demand. It is the best service in the world. It is with the world's wealthiest individuals. So for me, the thing that I really took away and that I loved the most from it was the fact of being around the world's wealthiest individuals and seeing how they lived, how they did business, how they managed their money, how they treated the people around them, what that caliber of wealth contributed to the world, and the ways that I didn't know people could use money for good. And so it is high demand. I mean, it is intense. And depending on who the owners of the vessel were, or whether it's private or charter, there were a lot of variables. It was fast paced, and it was really super exciting. But I loved every aspect of it. It really is an amazing experience.
For those of us, most of us, who have never been up close and personal with the very wealthy, give us an anecdote or two.
Money isn't everything in the world. It doesn't matter if you have all of it or you have none of it. Happiness is a choice. And some people who had the most money were the most amazing people. And some people that had even more money were so unhappy. And having that amount of wealth is there is an extreme responsibility that comes with that. People want things from you all the time. They want to be around you because you're wealthy. Your friend circle gets smaller because not everyone knows how or wants to be in that element. So I really did learn. I had the best example. One of the first people who chartered the vessel I was on, he was a man who was homeless as a single dad in the streets of LA in his 20s. And he built a business empire. And 20 years later, he celebrated his birthday as one of the Fortune 500, world's wealthiest people. And he woke up every single day, opened the doors, and said, "Good morning, world." And he didn't carry a BlackBerry. His wife and him were madly in love. The people around him respected him. He was kind and he was gentle and he did life his way. And so it showed me that you can have it all in life, but not everyone chose to do that.
Now, Kim, probably a few listeners are scratching their heads saying, "What's a BlackBerry?"
Right.
But for those few listeners who are scratching their head, to put it just an oversimplification, that sort of was the precursor to the iPhone, which I'm sure
Yes.
every one of you have heard of that. So,
Yes.
Kim, I always ask my guests, obviously given that this is a cruising show, I always ask my guests about their cruising background. Now, I know that your traditional, what I call traditional or mainstream cruising background is limited. You have a great background as far as seafaring activities, but surprisingly not that much cruising. Talk about your first cruise, traditional cruise.
Yeah, so my first cruise was out of San Diego and it was very short. We went from San Diego to Catalina and then somewhere in Mexico, but it was the time there was a swine flu or something. And so we didn't get off the boat in Mexico, but it was just a few days and it was really fun. It was a whole different experience because I had come from the private yacht world. So being on a cruise ship was like, it's sort of like going to a mall or going to a boutique. It felt like there were so many options in the mall version, like a cruise. And so, but I loved it. I was like, there's a whole other world out here that I didn't know about. So it was pretty fun.
Do you remember the ship?
No, I have no idea what the ship was. I think it was a Carnival cruise line, if I remember right, but I don't know what the vessel was.
I think I heard you say that your cruise was after the private yacht world, right?
Yes,
So,
yes.
I mean, I just can't imagine it's night and day. But contrast the two worlds. Besides some of the crazy wealth that you experienced and observed in the yacht world, but any similarities to being on the water as crew in the yacht world and leisure cruising, other than water?
There are some similarities when it comes to, service, like being on sea and having crew on a vessel and taking care of your needs. Like those things are similar. They're done in completely different ways, but being on a vessel where you're not tending to the lines or, you get to just experience the joy of being on the water. I think that's the similarity between the private yacht and the cruise ship world, is that there are people that are there to make sure you're having a good time and to provide what you need. That they're really vastly different in most ways, but I think that's probably the one way that they are similar.
Do you think you will ever try a traditional cruise again?
Possibly, because I think it's something that my family would enjoy. So I think it's a great way I think it's a great family holiday. For me personally, I like smaller smaller groups of people. I like, especially with my background of being at sea, like cruise ships can be a little large for me. But I think with a family holiday, I think that's the beauty of them. And that's where, for me, I think it would work really well.
We'll be right back.
The Joy of Cruising podcast guests receive a gift sponsored by GigSky of a 3 gigabyte cruise plus land data package valued at $60. Relying on ship Wi-Fi is slow, unsecure, and sometimes not available. And at foreign ports, travelers don't want to pay their carriers high fees. GigSky provides a solution that will save them a significant amount of money. To get your own data package usable on the ship or in ports, here is my link to GigSky. https://gigsky.pxf.io/NLOXOR. This can be found in the show notes below. For a 10% discount, use the code Joy of Cruising.
Now, are you completely removed from the world of working at sea?
For the most part, yes. I still have a lot of friends in the industry. I considered going back recently, just to fill in the gaps, kind of in a freelance way. But you have to have some safety certifications and a particular medical certificate, and mine are now expired. And so I was like, well, do I really want to spend, $1,500 to be up to date to freelance? And so I kind of decided against it at that moment. But I am at this point removed from the private yacht industry. Most of the people I know at this point have gotten out and have created businesses around the yachting world in one way or another. But for the most part, I'm out.
So you are focused then on your massively popular podcast, Design Her Travel. Is that your first foray into podcasting?
Yes and no. With another friend, I think it was back in 2016, possibly, we looked at starting a podcast about yachting. And at the time, the barrier to entry was a whole different level. Like there wasn't, there weren't apps. The hosting platforms were totally different. The technology was different. It was much more technologically challenging to produce a podcast at that point. So it just kind of fizzled out. And so, fast forward to 2023, I guess, January 2023. And that's when that's when I launched Design Her Travel. And so I thought about it before, but that was the first time I actually made it happen.
Now, what motivated you to get into podcasting, to launch Design Her Travel?
Well, I was at a time in life when I was ready for a change, and I knew that my son was getting ready to go away to school in a couple of years. And I really missed my community. Being based in the Midwestern part of the US has been really challenging for me, just because I am a global citizen and I'm living in a place where people have very deep roots and maybe have never left. And so, being the black sheep wherever I am I'm used to it, but yet sometimes it's pretty challenging. And so I created Design Her Travel to reconnect with community of people designing their dream lives and doing what they loved and centered around travel. And so it really was a way for me to reconnect with community. And I think that was the motivation, knowing that I would be creating a business down the line when I had freedom to be, location independent once again. And so that was the sort of bottom foundation piece for it.
Mm-hmm. Talk about being to use almost a cliche, talk about being a fish out of water. But you took control of things, and even though you were in the Midwest and nowhere near the sea, you put yourself there in effect.
Yeah, I did. Well, my family was here, and when it came to raising my son as a single mom and being the sole caregiver, I was like, I am going to need some help. So I went from being a global citizen with no home base for, I don't know, well over a decade, to being a single mom and a sole caregiver. And so I was like, I need my family. So I returned back to the Midwest, and I hadn't lived here I'd been away as long as I'd ever lived here. So it was wild to return. And so I've been here for quite a few years now, and it still blows my mind. Like I still don't feel like I belong, even though I'm from here.
Well, on Design Her Travel, in the intro, I bragged about you. I talked about how a lot of similarities between our podcasts, but then one big difference, which makes you my travel. I'm sorry, what makes you my podcast role model because Design Her Travel is an absolutely top rated podcast. So talk. We talked about it a little bit. I talked about your five. Sort of milestones or keystones, but talk about the podcast in general and tell our listeners how to access it.
Sure. So you can find Design Her Travel on any of your favorite podcast platforms, whether it's Spotify or Apple or Overcast, wherever you get your podcast, Design Her Travel is there. And Design Her Travel, I release 2 episodes each week, and the episodes on Tuesday are interviews, and the episodes on Thursday are a reflection that's inspired by the episode with a guest. So I interview people that have designed the life of their dreams with travel as a centerpiece. And that can be anything from 2 women who have traveled to every country in the world. I interviewed Thor Peterson, who traveled to every country in the world without stepping foot on a plane one time. It took him well over 10 years. Just people that have just done amazing things, but travel is the key component. And so it really is.
Mm-hmm.
The stories and the interviews are there to help inspire you to know that you can create that big life goal and that big life dream that you're looking at. And these stories are inspiration and proof that anyone can do it. You just have to decide to do it.
Now, in addition to accessing the podcast, how can listeners follow you on social media in general?
So I'm most active on Instagram, and it's at Design Her Travel. So it's super easy. It's the same handle everywhere. If you hear this, reach out on in Instagram, send me a DM. I love hearing from people, and that's the easiest place. I'm pretty active on there. So if you want to connect, then definitely do that there, and definitely check out the podcast wherever you tune in.
What do you do in your me time, Kim, when you're not sailing, not working on your show? Do you have any other pastimes, avocations?
Yeah, I'm a big outdoor enthusiast. Like I love getting time outside, especially in this day and age where I spend so much time in front of a screen. Getting outside and disconnecting from technology is super important to me. So, living in a rural community, I also have a deep connection with food. And so I like to explore and, go to sources of where something comes from and just be very connected to the earth, which is quite the opposite of my life where I've been very connected to the sea.
Well, that's interesting. We have a question coming up. I'll save it for a few minutes later to talk about food, but I'm kind of interested in your perspective. What about, are you a leisure traveler in general?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like travel is the one thing that fills my soul the most. It makes me feel the most alive. And it doesn't have to be, a long trip across the planet. I'm the type of person who never takes the same route to work. I don't ever drive to the same store. Like it's literally I love and thrive on the new in my day. I need adventure. I need exploration. I need my days to feel exciting because I feel most alive. And so I might go to a little town nearby that has a cute Main Street Square and just explore the stores there or talk to the people, because people are really the key. And so it doesn't matter. I never really meet a stranger. And so those things are tiny trips on a regular basis, and connecting with people and places are the things that fill my heart with joy.
You know, you describe yourself as a global citizen, and everything you say just kind of fits that. You know, it's like if we still had dictionaries and we looked up global citizen in the dictionary, we'd see your picture.
I thank you. I love it. It's really, it is just, it is who I am.
You know, it's funny. You said you never take the same route to work or to the store or whatever, to shopping or whatever. I can't remember exactly what you said. I have that issue, although for me it's because I am directionally challenged. I'm not kidding, Kim. We've been here. I retired here to North Carolina 3 years ago. My wife is the driver. She drives like 99% of the time, and she's the best driver in the world. But I am like total opposite. I am seriously directionally challenged. This is what I'm about to say is not an exaggeration. So I've lived here 3 years, and my wife, if my wife is out or at work and I have to go to the grocery store, do you know that I still put the grocery store in the GPS? So when I say I never take the same route to a store, it's not because I'm exploring my surroundings.
That's funny.
But so do you have anything booked?
I'm
a long
currently
trip or trips to, it sounds like you do a fair amount of road tripping in the States.
I do. I have over the years done more road trips than I've done other things. And it really is, that just comes down to financial reasons. It's just that's easier. And from being in the Midwest, it's much easier to take a road trip somewhere. I'm currently working on a trip to Egypt, and I've got a couple of concerts booked in the coming year that are, and around the country. So those are the things that I have on paper right now.
Couple of concerts, you said?
Yes, live music is one of my favorite things. So it's something that I love to do.
Mine too. Can I be nosy? Who you going to see?
The one that was just booked is Ryan Adams in Lexington at the Lexington Opera House. So he's celebrating the 25th anniversary of his Heartbreaker album, which is one of my favorite albums. So I'm super excited. My son and I are actually going to that together, so it should be fun.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. You know what I've recently put on my bucket list? I want to go to a concert. Have you heard about the Sphere in Las Vegas?
Yeah.
I got to go there and check out a concert. I've had a couple of guests on who've been there, and I've done a fair amount of research on it. It sounds like the most technologically efficient music venue in the world. They say it's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I feel like the Sphere I found myself saying this a few times recently, where we've lived our way into the future, and the Sphere is very much that.
So you say you have Egypt coming up, you have some travels in the States. What's on your travel bucket list?
Oh, goodness, that is a list that is ever expanding and growing. Currently, my top are Madagascar, which is interesting because that's probably the first place that ever landed on my bucket list that I was consciously aware of. But I've been researching. I'm in the beginning of the research for that trip. Bhutan and Borneo are the places that are probably, and throw in Cuba. Those are probably the top on my list.
Borneo, Cuba. Educate me. Bhutan. I must have skipped geography class that day. What is that?
Yes, so it's in Asia, and the thing that's beautiful about Bhutan is that they don't measure like their GDP, they measure gross national happiness. And so when I learned about that years ago, I'm like, that is the place for me. Yeah. So it's a pretty expensive place because you have to pay, I think it's like $100 a day in fee to be there, because they really want to maintain their culture. They want to they don't want it to be just open to a flood of tourism. So they limit, you have to have a guide every day, but it's mountainous, it's unbelievable. The people are beautiful, and I can't wait to explore it.
Well, I will have to do a little more research on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like you. My bucket list runneth over, and that's a challenge because I'm a fair bit older than you, so I don't I don't have as much time to check things off. And the bad thing, I shouldn't say it's a bad thing. It's actually a fun thing, but it kind of exacerbates my problem with getting things checked off of my bucket list. Is I keep adding them due to guests. That I have, like you, I hear something and it sounds intriguing, and then I do a little research, and the next thing you know, it's on my bucket list. That's a fun process though, to add things, and then even more fun to check them off.
Yeah, the more I travel, the bigger the world gets, not the smaller. I learn more about the planet. I learn more places. I discover more sort of nooks and crannies that I'd never heard of before. And so I think the list will continue to get bigger instead of smaller.
Well, Kim, before we let you go, we like to close all our shows with some light or fun cruise questions, or in your case, cruise and travel and sailing questions. So the first is kind of a softball because it helps me get some ideas. So I know that you haven't done a lot of cruising, but you've done a lot of traveling and a lot of sailing. So what are your favorite sailing and travel drinks and sailing and travel food?
Even though sweet drinks are not my typical go-to, the painkillers in the Caribbean and the BVIs, I forget the name of the beach right now, I can see it clearly, are some of the best fruity beach cocktails I've ever had.
I love painkillers.
They're so good.
Yeah. How about food?
Food, oh my goodness. Cruising food, so food that's
Doesn't have to be cruising food, just food that you partake in your travels that you don't necessarily make each night, or make during the week.
I have to say, being in Asia and just street food in general, especially in Penang, in Malaysia, it is some of the most amazing food ever. It doesn't matter what you're eating. It's unbelievable. It's inexpensive. It has so much flavor. So if I had to pick a region or a place in the world to live just where, based on food, I would choose Southeast Asia any day.
Now, you know what I always ask world travelers like yourself, what's the most exotic food you've sampled in your various travels? And when I say exotic, I'm saying from the perspective of not necessarily you, but from the perspective of the listeners. What might they find exotic?
I spent some time in Chiang Mai, and the woman who owned the guest house that I was staying in was a beautiful Thai woman. She was so, so lovely. And she took myself and a couple of others from the guest house to this little lake that pretty much locals were at. Like I don't know if there were any tourists there. And so she ordered a dish and she said, "This is called dancing shrimp." And we were like, "Oh, this sounds fun. Okay, cool." And so that comes in this pot with a lid, this small pot. And she said, "Okay, I'm going to lift the lid, but you have to go fast." And I was like, "Okay." And so she opens the lid, and they're live shrimp. So they're jumping. They're these tiny they're dancing, right? They're jumping up and down and moving. So you grab one, quickly eat it. And it was like dancing shrimp. I will never forget why, she didn't explain why they were called dancing. They're called dancing because they jump up out of the bowl because they're still alive. So that's probably one of the most exotic things I've ever eaten.
Wow. That sounds fun. I love that question. I love asking world travelers that question because of your answer. Your answer typifies the kind of response I get. I mean, really eye-opening. Some responses are, you know, uh, I'll never try what they mention. That one I would try. You know.
Yeah, it was fun. And it just the name and just her laughter and all of our surprise and just the environment. It was just one of those, like, I feel like it's a core memory because there were so many sort of sensory things going on with it. That, yeah, it just made it a phenomenal experience.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard a couple of people. You mentioned, I think you said something about like street foods in Asia. I've heard some stories of some interesting street foods in Asia. You know,
Yeah.
scorpions on a stick, and then I've heard way more exotic things that I don't think I want to mention right now. But I've heard it all. Well, I should say I've heard it all. I've heard a lot. So. Okay, next question, Kim. What's your most memorable, funniest, or even most embarrassing sailing experience? Doesn't have to be funny, doesn't have to be embarrassing, but what's the one moment that sticks with you?
When I was with the family cruising from Australia to Indonesia, and we were in the South China Sea. Like I said, my watch was from 2 to 5 in the morning and 2 to 5 in the evening. And there are lots of vessels that have no metal, the Indonesian vessels that are around, so they don't show up on radar. So you're very alert in the night. And that night it was so dark and amazing stars. But I look out in the horizon and I see this crescent moon like rising, and it was red and it was crescent, and it was huge. Like, it seemed like the largest moon I had ever seen, just right above the horizon in a black night. And I was gobsmacked because, one, I didn't know that new moons could rise out of the sea like that. And two, I'd never seen a red crescent moon, and I'd never been in the middle of an ocean to see the moon rise like that. And I will never forget just standing in such awe and wonder of the experience and what this earth has. It was absolutely beautiful.
Well, Kim, you know, there's an internet saying, photos or it didn't happen. That sounds like an amazing and a picturesque memory. Is any chance that's something that you've saved for posterity that we can share with the listeners?
No, that was a moment that I just took in. And it was funny because at that point in time, I was huge into taking photos. And I was always, the captain would joke, he's like, it's always the world and you with a lens in between, and I just stood there in wonder and did not take one photo.
Let me ask you another question. I call this an oddball question. Uh, and it's oddball in that it doesn't have anything necessarily to do with cruising or sailing or podcasting. So let me say, first of all, I know some of your social media following and friends are listening. So let me say welcome to the many Design Her Travel fans and your friends. And we certainly hope you have enjoyed listening to the Joy of Cruising podcast, and we'll come back to listen to additional episodes. So, Kim, to bring your fans in even more and engage my listeners, share one thing that my listeners and your friends and following don't know about Kim.
That's a good question. Let me see. Oh, I'm a little stumped on this one. I am I am the type of person that people, I think my outward appearance is one way, but who I am is very different. So I'm a very free spirit naturally, that most people that have ever met me would probably notice that. But I'm also highly organized. Like, my spatial awareness is good. I can look at something and tell you exactly how many pieces of something that can fit in that. So that might be something people don't know. And it came in very handy years working on board vessels with tight spaces. I could be like, no, you can fit 6 wine boxes and 3 cases of soda or whatever it is in that space. So I have an amazing sense of spatial awareness. I can pack a car like nobody's business. I can pack a suitcase and open the world as soon as you unzip it, but I'm really good with spatial awareness.
That reminds me, I assume it was a national commercial, but there was a commercial. It was running not that long ago, and I can't remember even what it was a commercial for, but it was a woman. She would be walking, and someone would be trying to do something, and she'd just look and say, "That's not going to fit." Do you remember that commercial?
I do not, but I know what that feels like. My son and I have that battle all the time. I'm like, dude, no, get a smaller container. He's like, it won't fit. I'm like, yeah, it'll fit.
Oh, I wish I remembered that commercial because it's so apropos to what you said. I mean, and she would say, and then somebody fit something, and it clearly would have been hard work, and she walks by and she says something like, "Well done, sir. Well done." Oh, I can't. Some of the listeners will know the commercial and say, "Okay, that's why he's bringing that up. It fits."
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah, I love it. I can look. It's. I don't know. I didn't realize other people didn't have that skill. Like it's just a natural part of how my brain works. And I'm like, oh yeah, that'll fit or it won't fit. And so it's yeah.
Well, Kim, thank you so much for coming on the Joy of Cruising podcast. We like to present cruising in all of its diversity, from people who have been on the supply side, with the cruise ships, with the cruise lines. I know that you worked on actually excursions. You on the supply side, involving cruise ship excursions. Say a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I worked on the Nepali coast and Kauai for a few years, and there were days when cruise ships came into Kauai that we would host cruise ship guests. And so those days were always very busy and full because cruise ships tend to have like large groups of people. And so we would take people out snorkeling and whale watching depending on the season. And yeah, so that was my experience on that side of the industry.
So I was saying, we like to present cruising from any and all angles, and so I'm glad that we got your perspective. Thank you so much for coming on. All the best to Design Her Travel. I jokingly referred to you in the opening as a podcast role model. But that's no joke. I would like to be where you are. That's my aspiration. So thank you for being a role model, and thank you for coming on. And as I like to say to my guests, we will see you on the ocean.
Yes, and thank you for having me. And it's been such a pleasure. And for anyone that might be interested, I did not mention this earlier. For Design Her Travel, we're launching our first group trips in 2025. So if anyone wants to explore Egypt with me, then sign up for the wait list. So I'm taking a small group of women to Egypt to explore the world together. So I would love to have some of your listeners join me.
I am so glad that you brought that up. Many of my guests are, influencers, vloggers, bloggers, and in that group, they tend to have a lot of group cruises. And so a question that is kind of standard for me is, have you ever done or would you consider a group cruise? And I didn't ask that of you, but I'm so glad you brought it up. So anything else you want to say to the listeners? I mean, you got that. When is that going to be? It's to Egypt. When?
Yeah, well, I'm finalizing the dates right now, but it'll be late spring of 2025 is when the trip will be. And it does include a portion of it is a Nile cruise. So if cruising's totally like you have to have that to go on a trip, then definitely do it because we'll be on an amazing vessel and checking out ancient temples and sites and have our own Egyptologist with us at all times. And it's going to be an amazing experience. So I'd love to have you there.
Is there a link available yet?
There is a link for the wait list, and so I can share that with you. Yeah.
Yeah, share that with me, and I'll put it in the show notes. See if we can get you a sign up or two or three.
Awesome.
The Joy of Cruising and Cruising Interrupted, each $16.99 plus shipping, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again for $18.99 can be ordered at the link on thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com. For each of the 3 books, use the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast and get $4 off. The Joy of Cruising books are also available at Amazon. Order the ebook at Amazon or your favorite online retailer. Stay in touch by joining the Joy of Cruising Podcast Facebook group or following the Joy of Cruising Podcast on Instagram. We're constantly adding new shows. Please leave a review and tell a friend about us. We hope you enjoyed this brief escape to the ocean. See you next week.